From the studios of Cheshire TV in Keene, New Hampshire, it's The Men's Room, a show by men, about men, and for everyone. Sponsored by the Monadnock Men's Resource Center and hosted by Damien Licata and Forrest Seymour.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Men's Room. My co-host, Forrest Seymour, is off today. I'm Damien Licata, and we are sponsored by the Monadnock Men's Resource Center. Today we have a really interesting show with a couple of great guests, members of Boys to Men, not the Boys to Men you're thinking about. I've got a brief announcement I want to make, too, that's very important. This is the Rocky Horror Picture Show, which is coming to Keene on April 5th to benefit the Granite State Monarchs, which is a peer support organization for consumers of mental health services, of which I happen to be the director. So I wanted to take this opportunity to let you know about that. It's going to be a great time, a lot of fun. Tickets are available at the Colonial Theater right now. So give them a call. It's a very popular event. This is the third year in a row we've done this, and always goes over very well in this community. So enough about that. I wanted to introduce to you our two guests. We have today a gentleman representing an organization called Boys to Men, which is about mentoring young men, and we'll give them an opportunity to tell you more about that. We have Kristen Bolter, who is a representative of the Boys to Men New England. He's a co-facilitator of the Rites of Passage. He's been in Brattleboro for a resident for about 7 years, and also involved in the Mankind Project. We had someone on the program a few shows back talking about the Mankind Project, another very worthy endeavor. He's a former apprentice also to Vermont Wilderness School. And we also have Mark Morey here, who's founder of the Institute for Natural Learning in Brattleboro, and a co-founder of Vermont Wilderness School, where I believe there's a connection here, I'm sensing. Visionary for bringing back meaningful culture, and we'll give him a chance to explain what he means by that. So welcome, gentlemen.
Thanks.
It's great to have you here.
Good to be here.
It's Boys to Men is, as I alluded to, is a mentoring program for young men. If you wanted to give a sort of quick overall description of what this program is, what would that be?
Well, Boys to Men is something that's basically partially come out of people who have been involved in the Mankind Project, and that they've been doing this work for themselves as far as...
Sorry about that. Go ahead.
Sorry. They've been doing this interpersonal skills work and other things included in the Mankind Project. And it's been really powerful for a lot of men who've been involved in it. Mm-hmm. And somewhere along the line, they started to realize that, a lot of the stuff that they were working with as men goes back to their past, as their childhood. And that a lot of that work is because of wounds that came up when they were children. Mm-hmm. And it was, the lack of having good adult role models and people to listen to them and people to mentor them in a nurturing way at that point in their lives. So instead of just providing this atmosphere and this type of work for men, so let's take it where it belongs, back to the boys, because they're the ones who really need it.
Okay. So, and we're talking about particularly that what is lacking is some sort of mentoring by older men for these young men in this program?
Yeah, it's a combination of an initiation and a rites of passage. Mm-hmm. And the initiation is the teaching part, and helping the young men to basically discover, themselves and their place in the world, and learn the values of accountability, integrity, respect, and modeling that for them. And then the rites of passage is the part that really challenges them. Sometimes physical, sometimes in different ways, that pushes them to their limits and helps them learn about themselves in another way.
Mm-hmm. Now there's a wilderness component to this, isn't that right, Mark? There's a portion of this program where part of this initiation process where these young boys go out into the wilderness?
Well, I can't answer that exactly because I haven't attended this ceremony before. I was going to speak to rites of passage in a much larger context of where it originates in humanity. So if you want to go there for a second, we could talk about how nature plays a role.
Sure.
In cultures around the world, rites of passage is common. And it's one of the things that is part of the human blueprint. Just like elders, for example, are the ones who are carrying on the teachings. And it's only relatively recently that we've drifted away from this. And we haven't missed the significance of it until we've had several generations of youth growing up to be adults in the world and noticing maybe adolescent behavior. And it becomes quite dangerous when they are not acknowledged right at that exact time of how do they become adults in the world? Where are the instructions? And then we forgot that we ever did that.
And oftentimes these young men will look elsewhere to fill that need, the sort of basic human need.
That's right.
Yeah.
So,
Now, and we are talking about, we're not just talking about youth in general here. In this case, we're talking specifically about boys.
that's right.
Yeah.
And in this day and age, men have a big influence on how the world goes. So when we think about nature, if we don't introduce boys to nature from the youngest of age as part of themselves, as part of their existence that feeds them, feeds their family, and they have a responsibility to take care of it, to protect it, to wisely interact with it from their wisest self. They'll grow up to be men that don't do that if they don't get those instructions. And if they grow up to not even have a relationship with it, we get the world that we have today, which is a world in crisis. Not
Where
just
nature
with
is
men.
primarily just exploited.
Which is like exploiting our own home. It becomes unsustainable.
Yeah.
So they always took place in nature, initiations, rite of passage, in all the oldest cultures. And I'm not sure how much there's a nature component in this program. The rite of passage that I've been running the last 5 years is around a fire, tending a fire for 24 hours. And it's something that Crispin's experienced in our apprenticeship, which has to do with not only being with themselves in that challenge of tending it for 24 hours, but what takes place around realizing they are the fire, and whatever they put into the fire, they get back out and whatnot.
Okay. Yeah. So, there's a connection with this. I'm sorry. The rites of passage. The wilderness school. Did they do this rites of passage? The fire tending. That's what you were referring to.
Right. The sacred fire
through that
initiation
school.
for boys takes place under the Institute for Natural Learning now, but it began at the Vermont Wilderness School.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So I'm curious to hear how Boys to Men works with or doesn't work with nature around this.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely a nature component to the Boys and Men rites of passage, and it's looks a little different than the sacred fire rites of passage that Mark is speaking of, but it basically it's the walking in two worlds where we're trying to take kids that are coming from backgrounds where they may not have had a lot of nature experience, may not have done a lot of camping or being outdoors or had a real close relationship, and we're trying, wherever they're at, we're trying to find a balance between a place and creating an environment that feels comfortable and safe to them, and yet is also going to push their edge a little bit and maybe put them in some places of discomfort just a little bit from time to time so that they can grow on that edge and yet hold a strong, safe container around them so they feel like they have the core safety net so that they can take a little bit more risk.
Right. I know there are a number of programs now that have been cropping up around this idea of mentoring and initiation, particularly for boys, some inclusive of girls as well, adolescents, and this nature component, this idea of going out alone in some cases with nature, and there's some deprivation involved in some cases. There's a couple of days with just water. And so on. There was we've had other folks on the show talk about experiences like that that challenge these young men to, and also sort of provide a kind of environment or a circumstance in which there's introspection Is that part of that process in what you're talking about?
Yeah, the introspection is a very key part of the process. Although with the Boys to Men rites of passage, it often looks a little different. They're not being sent off by themselves. They're actually, they spend a lot of the time with mentors. There's a very high mentor to initiate ratio. There's basically a mentor or a journeyman or more for every boy. Or I think there was actually twice as many at the one I went to. And they're also with each other a lot. And so there's also interwoven in that, there also are places where they're given time to be introspective, because that's necessary for their own development and their own learning.
And some processing of what's happening.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But there's also very much a group bonding that happens, and a lot of really deep sharing and a deeper level of truth that they reach, through this process with each other and themselves.
That's great. I want to talk more about the mentor aspect of this, that side of it, but I understand you brought a clip that's a preview of a film that's going to be shown coming up, and we'll say more about that. But let's take a look at this clip first, and then we'll talk more about the specifics of the mentoring aspect of this program.
Great.
Sponsored by the Monadnock Men's Resource Center and hosted by Dave.
Yeah. While Don's working on that, we can talk a little bit more. Say a little bit about what we're about to see. This film, that has to do with this program.
Well, the film basically tells the story of two of these young men who have been through this Rites of Passage program and the continued follow-up mentoring. And they were, I think they were chosen because they came from pretty extreme situations. Although they're not so different from, I'm sure kids we have in our community.
Yep.
But they came from rough roads, they didn't have father figures in their lives. One of them was, pretty depressed, and, the other one had some, he was involved in gangs and whatnot. And this became something that really enabled them to start turning their lives around in a much more positive way. And so it's a kind of, partially it's a personal story, but it's also sharing a larger story of what the work means. And it also has a lot in there from the men who are acting as mentors and their own personal journey of what's happening for them, And at times they feel like, am I doing this right?
Right, sure, yeah. I think the whole idea of mentoring young men can feel somewhat intimidating, I would imagine, for some men. Is it difficult to get men involved in this kind of work, to do this sort of thing?
Yeah, I would say that in general, we've lost a lot of community pieces, right? So what is the men's role in community in general? What's the elder's role in community? What's the adolescent's role in community? And young boys, they need uncles to function. They need instructions other than from their parents. And because we're not as related as we used to be, as a group, as a village, and as a community, they end up looking for that elsewhere, right? From peers or internet or who knows what. And men are, since they're growing up without having that experience, that's a big gap to return to. So even if they get inspired to return to it, there's a lot of terror there because they don't understand their own adolescent development. And so it gets to be a downward spiral, right? So if we miss that time and then we grow up to be adults and don't have that, what do we rely on to carry this on? So what's happening right now is we're not only reclaiming adolescent rites of passages, but we're bringing the adults through initiation as soon as we can to get them back up to speed, to own their life stage, and to become elders again. And there are older people stepping up to reclaim all that all those life stages, so that they can begin stepping into their elder life stage, which is a very challenging task.
So if I'm hearing you, you're saying that the mentors themselves need to be initiated before they can be in a place
Precisely.
where they can provide this.
Of course,
Yep.
it's inauthentic otherwise. Right?
And as part of being a facilitator at the Rites Passage for the boys, in order to do that, I had to go through a day-long workshop, which was, it's a very brief workshop, but it was designed to basically put the men who are going to be in the position of being a mentor back in touch with that space that they experienced as teenagers, so that they can get down to a real truthful level with those boys, and that's a real important key part of the process.
Yeah, I imagine it must be. As you say, I mean, this is not something that comes naturally anymore, to men to be in this role.
It does and it doesn't. I mean, I think there are a lot of people that would say that we are hardwired to do this. And there is something that, sometimes you have to get over your stage fright of it, or your whatever reservations you have, but once you get into it, you just realize that this is natural.
Yeah. So what do you call upon to let's get specific here. What do you call upon these men to do with these young men? What does mentoring mean in this context?
It's actually very simple. And mentoring, a lot of it is role modeling, and a lot of it is simply just showing up and being willing to listen, and also, letting those boys shine, encouraging them, letting them, helping them to see their own gifts and praising them, and just bless them in general, because they haven't had a lot of that oftentimes, and that's, that can be a wound not having it, and so just men that are willing to show up and be committed and listen to them and show that they care is huge, and that's really the foundation of it.
Yeah.
It's not rocket science, but
Right.
it is important.
And what is it what about this is uniquely male?
Well, I would say that what's uniquely male about it is that only men can do this for boys.
Why is that? Why? I mean, in your program, it's designed for boys, men and boys, obviously, by the name, Boys to Men. But what is it that makes this program just for boys? Why is it only appropriate for boys?
How about this? We'll answer this from a big picture perspective, right? So you're talking about what's the difference between men and women? There's a fundamental set of instructions there, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it can always be argued, that there are, some folks would say there are no differences between men and women. So that's kind of what I'm asking you is first of all, what differences do you perceive, and how do those come into play?
Well, first of all, men know what it means to be a boy. They live through that experience. And it's about authenticity. So it would be inauthentic for somebody who is not a boy to be speaking and mentoring to boys about how to move forward into life. I think that's probably the shortest, most powerful answer. It's the only possible person who can mentor a boy is a man. And I think the other piece is that in terms of rites of passage, we're not saying there isn't such thing as a girl's rite of passage, which is somewhat implied in the question, why are we only talking about boys? But they have a natural demarcation in terms of coming into their menstrual time, which means they're becoming a woman biologically. When does that happen for a man? Right? And in terms of human history, when you look around in different cultures, that was the origin of this ceremony, is this demarcating the teachings and lessons they need to have to be responsible and accountable for the internal gifts that they're developing. Right? But it's not clear, so they created one.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess we're not going to get a chance to get that clip in. I'm not sure, but if it starts to run, we'll stop talking and we'll know that it's going to be happening. But we've got just about 10 minutes left. So what I'd like to do is take some time to sort of talk a little bit about how would you describe if there's a before and after for a young man going through this program. How would you describe that before and after?
Well, I would describe it as before. There's a lot of wondering, a lot of question. What does it mean to be a man? What is you know, what do I fill this need that I have? Because it's basically a, you know, it's a hardwired need that these boys get to a certain stage in their life where they're changing and transitioning into the adult world, and they need to test themselves, and they need to have a rites of passage. And if they don't have that, that's socially, you know, sanctioned in a healthy way, if they don't have that put forth to them, then they find other ways to satisfy that challenge that they need to have. And usually it turns out to be unhealthy ways, you know, drugs, alcohol, tobacco usage, things that are basically societally frowned upon because they have to test something to find out about themselves and who they are.
Okay. Where does this happen? Do people experience this? It's in the Brattleboro area right now. I know, I can tell from your website that this is a much larger program, but locally centered around Brattleboro.
Yeah, there will be a local site chosen. I'm not sure if there's been one chosen yet.
Okay.
The past last year's Rochester area rites of passage took place outside Dansville, New York. It was a very nice space. It was a retreat center that had quite a bit of land and a nice waterfall, swimming area, and it had a great structure and outside space. So it's basically an outdoor environment.
Yeah. Okay. But you haven't selected a specific space yet.
I think they did select one in Dummerston.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Right. Well, let's give it another try and see if we can get that clip in before we run out of time entirely. Okay. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the film. Okay.
Sounds good.
Some people recognize me for what gang I'm in, and I end up getting into a fight.
When I attempted suicide, I have no real recollection of what I've done.
I don't know if I'll get stabbed, shot, or if it'll be the other way around.
I took him down to juvenile detention center, and I was going to turn him over to the state.
Folks are waking up to the fact that everybody knows a boy who's struggling.
I represent the warrior in you. I'm the part of you that gets things done. I'm the part of you that protects those that you care for. I'm the part of you that's strong when you need to be strong.
I'm the part of you that restores order to the chaos. The part of you that blesses people. The part of you that's not selfish. I represent the energy of the king.
I can see the camaraderie building. I can see you guys hanging on to each other. You're already feeling that connection building. And we're gonna do this all weekend, and you guys are gonna know each other better than you know your brothers.
That's what we need now, today, in our societies. We need to get the men back. It's not the boys. These boys are dying for this.
This is the time when you guys get to choose what kind of men you want to be. How you're gonna show up in the world.
Okay, so that's just a little taste of what happens over these. Is it a weekend long or?
Yeah.
Okay, and in this film, which is a longer documentation of particular experience for a couple of men, in particular. with a pretty dramatic before and after, I'm guessing.
Yeah, it tells the story of the weekend where they meet, the men and the youth. The youth go through this experience, right?
Yep.
They're bonded, it's intense, but it's just a weekend. And then there's this follow-up that takes place where they partner up. So each youth has one man, and they spend a year hanging out, going through experiences one-on-one as well as in a local group.
Okay.
And so it just tells the story of like the awkwardness, the breakthroughs, you know, the connection that finally develops, the trust that has to be earned. And really the blessing of what it means to have one person who will care about you no matter what.
Very powerful, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I can imagine. If people want to find out more about Boys to Men, where do they get more information? Where do they find out about the film? Where they can see this film maybe as an introduction to this program, or where they could get more information about Boys to Men?
There is a Boys to Men New England website that can give you more information on Boys to Men and what's happening in the New England area. Also, as far as the movie, there's information, I believe, on empowermentarts.org.
Empowermentarts.org. Okay.
It's at the Latches Theater in Brattleboro, so they can go to that website.
Okay. So it's being shown there?
Next Thursday.
Next Thursday. Okay. How many showings? Single showing?
Just a single showing,
Yep.
Okay.
It's considered a premiere, so it may not be back, you know. It's
Right.
your one chance to go.
Yep.
Next Wednesday night in Marlborough, New Hampshire, by the river, I'll be leading a talk on rites of passage. If you're interested in that conversation, you can go to the Institute for Natural Learning website and send me an email about that.
Okay. All right. Great. So, so I would encourage folks to do that. Get in touch. Find out more about Boys to Men. It sounds like a great program, and much needed. I know that there are a lot of boys who can benefit from that kind of guidance to find their way. So, I appreciate your work, both of you.
I might add also that it's one of the beautiful things in the film is it illustrates the journey from the mentor's perspective too, which is a really wonderful gift, you know, as well.
Yep. And I would encourage any men out there who are interested in the possibility of doing that to get in touch with the folks at this program. So we are out of time. We are over time. So I want to thank you both. It's been really interesting, and I'd love to have you back again sometime to talk more about this as the program grows in this area.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you all once again. We're really short on time. I want to remind you again of the Rocky Horror Picture Show. These flyers are all over town. If you want more information, contact either the Granite State Monarchs or the Colonial Theater about that. And thanks for tuning in to the Men's Room. We'll see you next time.
You've been watching The Men's Room, sponsored by the Monadnock Men's Resource Center and hosted by Damien Licata, co-director of the MMRC and executive director of the Granite State Monarchs, and Forrest Seymour, co-director of the MMRC and a therapist in private practice in Keene. You can learn more about the Monadnock Men's Resource Center, see past shows online, and find our Cheshire TV schedule at mmrconline.org. And thanks for joining us in the Men's Room.